Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. And I want to remind everyone that we are being recorded. This is a live streaming event. And what we're going to be doing this afternoon is we're going to be discussing 4 pieces of legislation. And the legislation that we're going to be discussing is HB 34 by Delegate Hill, HB 79 by Delegate Stewart, HB 93 by the fantabulous Delegate Holmes, and then HB 102 by Delegate Stein. I want to also make sure everyone understands that this afternoon we are in a discussion mode only and not in a voting participation. So we will be discussing these bills and will not be voting. So we're going to start first with HB 34. And HB 34 is a bill by Delegate Hill. And the bill is referencing courts and court records. And Matt, if you would come on, please, Matt, and give us a brief discussion or reminder of what this legislation does. Thank you, Matt.
Certainly. Everybody can hear me?
Matt?
All right, great. So HB 34 is failure to pay rent proceedings, prohibition of rent.
Got some feedback.
I think it might be because there's several delegates maybe sitting in the same spot and it's picking up between microphones.
Oh.
I think maybe if all the delegates mute themselves and then bring themselves back for questions, that might help.
Okay. Well, the delegates that are in the committee room are all muted except for me.
Okay.
So I do not hear any feedback now.
Okay.
All right. So Matt, the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah. So House Bill 34 is failure to pay rent proceedings, prohibition on rent increases, and sealing of court records. This is a reintroduction, and the bill is reintroduced based on my review, with one exception, is identical to a bill that had passed out of the House originally, was not considered by Environment and Transportation. It was a judiciary bill at the time. The one change that I see is this bill does not include a prohibition against the shielding of court records for a failure to pay rent case in the event the tenant receives federal funds and then fails to pay the non-subsidized portion that they owed. It's just treated as any other instance where the tenant fails to pay the rent that is due. It does lead me, however, to my first perhaps suggested amendment for the consideration of the subcommittee. Subcommittee doesn't mind, I'm going to share my screen really quick. Oh, I see the host is disabled participant screen sharing, but I can refer to where this.
Well, let me see if I can do that, Matt.
Okay.
You give me some instructions on what I need to do to allow you to do that.
I'm good at many things. Zoom is not one of them, unfortunately.
You may have to make him the co-host currently.
And how do I do that? And how do I do that?
I think that would resolve it.
That would go. So when you go to participants,
okay.
You can, there's the 3 little dots, and it might allow you to make him the co-chair.
Ask all to unmute, mute participants, allow participants unmute, allow participants to rename themselves, play sound, hide profile, lock meeting.
Unless you're not the person, the originator of the Zoom, that person may have to do it.
Well, I'm at a loss.
Oh, no.
Okay. All right.
So if the, I can explain accurately where I would be referring to the bills if members would like to follow along with me. And of course, we can get this sorted out for future meetings. My apologies, we should have had the technical side of this worked out in advance. But I'm referring to, you're looking at the bill as introduced, page 3 of the bill, and lines 32 and 33 at the bottom of page 3, where it reads, the form required under subsection A of this section shall include a question on whether the tenant used federal funds to subsidize the tenant's payment of rent owed under the lease agreement. I believe, after looking at this, that this might be a holdover from the time that there was that prohibition against allowing individuals to have their records shielded, and barring any other reason to collect this data, it probably is now irrelevant and could be struck. The requirement generally to have the judiciary establish and develop a document, a form titled Petition to Seal a Failure to Pay Rent Action to help facilitate the goals of the act would still be created. This would just strike that reference to the question on use of federal funds.
And where is it located again, Matt? On page 3, what lines?
Page, first reader of the bill, page 3, lines 32 through 33. It actually carries over onto page 4 of the bill in line 1.
And your suggestion, Matt, is to delete those sections. Is that correct?
Just to delete those lines, yes. What would be
Fine.
subsection B of section 2 in the uncodified language?
Yes, I got it. Any questions for Matt on that? Okay. All right. I'm sorry, Delegate Boyce, did you have a question? Can you unmute?
Sorry.
It's Delegate Baker.
Let me get Delegate Boyce first, and then I get Baker. Go ahead.
So, no problem. I just wanted to make sure I understand, according to you, Matt, that this is no longer relevant, even though some jurisdictions may have funds?
It's a little, so to walk you through, Delegate, in the original bill that this was based on, there was a prohibition against allowing sealing of a record where federal funds were used to subsidize an individual in a failure to pay rent action, and then that individual didn't pay any unsubsidized portion. So they still would have effectively failed to pay the rent because they didn't put in for their bit.
Got it.
And from what I from what I can tell, unless there's another individual on the call who can maybe enlighten the subcommittee as to why this should stay in, now that restriction, that prohibition has been cut out of the bill. And it would appear that this particular language is just meant to get to effectively a checkbox saying, yes, federal funds were used to subsidize the tenant's payment of rent. It seems like it's an unnecessary additional bit of information at this point, if there's not going to be that specific prohibition.
Got it.
Okay. And so that wouldn't necessarily include like Section 8 or anything like that. This would just be for those special federal funds that came to help with housing security.
I think at this point, the goal would just be to treat any failure to pay rent, even if you're only paying a portion and you're subsidized for the rest of it, is still just a failure to
pay the rent. Understood.
Rent.
Understood. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Delegate Baker?
Yes, just so that I understand. Line 32, letter B, the form required, strike that sentence. Line 32, line 33. On the back of that page, strike line 1.
Yes, that would be the recommended amendment. And then in addition, there would be a slight restructuring of lines 28 through 31. It's technical. It would remove the subsection A. Effectively, what it would read is section 2, and be it further enacted that on or before October 1, 2023 as one paragraph. But yes, the substantive portion would be deleting lines 32, 33, and then on page 4, line 1.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So I can I can, because this is just meant as a period for discussion, I can draft that up for the next meeting and send that out in advance of the meeting so that members could see it.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Matt. Yes, sir, Delegate Long.
I was just going to echo what Matt said. That would be great if I could, if we could just perhaps, I know for me to be helpful, just see that actually lined out, just to see it visually would be very helpful.
Okay.
Exactly.
Not a problem. Simple
and
amendment.
Just to let everyone know that that will be the norm prior to us voting. We will have the specific amendments in front of us based upon discussions prior to us voting so that we know exactly what we're voting on, okay? All right. And I see that we have a question, a delegate. Delegate Ryan, you're up.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair. Apologize. Just a point of clarification. I don't see it here, so I just want to make sure this is only would only apply to individuals and not businesses, right? That like if a business fails to pay their rent in a shopping center or something like that. Just as a matter of clarification, just want to for understanding.
Matt, I don't see anything in here that is.
There's no language one way or the other, Mr. Chair, what, pertaining to that. That's why I'm just trying to understand.
I know the intent is for residential. However, you are correct. I don't think I've seen language in here that is specific to commercial or residential. Matt, you have any suggestions here?
That actually might be a really good lead into my next suggested amendment, which I believe would also take care of some of the other perhaps amendments that were suggested by in testimony. When this bill was originally considered and developed, there were actually several bills on the shielding of failure to pay rent records, and one did pass last year. That's Chapter 722 of 2022. It was HB 521, landlord-tenant repossession for failure to pay rent, shielding of court records. Now, I want to stress that that bill had a very specific purpose, and it was related to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not as, but there are many parallels to what is being done in this bill. It created a new section of law, Real Property Section 8502. And it, in some ways, to me, from a drafting perspective, makes sense to, if the subcommittee and the committee were to consider doing something like this, expand upon or modify that provision rather than having potentially two conflicting provisions, or one that applies to one particular subset of people under one particular condition, and then more general provisions. It's, again, this is a period for discussion right now. I'd like to, before undertaking that process, which I believe, I would engage the Judiciary Committee directly, since they worked on that specific language. I wanted to kind of get the thoughts of the subcommittee as to if that made sense to pursue, rather than having the differing pieces. And that addresses, one last thing, that addresses some of the amendments that I've seen about, well, there really needs to be a clear definition of what is meant by sealing or shielding of the records. That is all included in 8502. And in fact, in certain individuals in their testimony referenced that there were definitions of that in 8502 of the Real Property article.
Okay, so in terms of the question, then do we need to have specific language relevant to making it specific to residential only, or is that in 502? You think?
I'd have, well, let me quickly pull up 502 and see if they reference residential. I think it might. I just don't recall, immediately. And of course, there are many individuals on the call, many advocates who might know that offhand.
While Matt is pulling up, is there anyone on the Zoom meeting now that has specific information whether it is 502 is referencing specifically residential.
It does only apply to a court record relating to an action for repossession of residential property.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
all right. So we need to do nothing then on this particular bill because that is already referenced in a different section.
No, you would probably want to clarify in this
Okay.
one.
Okay, got you. And are you going to put
In a
something in
similar
the
vein? If you put it into 8502, that particular section deals just with residential property. And then, you would be modifying provisions of 8502 to accomplish the intent or the goal of this legislation.
Okay. So you're going to, let me just add Delegate Healy. And Delegate Healy, when you start talking, I'm going to mute myself so we don't have the feedback. Delegate Healy, you're up.
Thank you very much. I won't say much. Is this bill the same as one we passed before and it did get all the way through the process, except for these minor changes?
So just to clarify, I don't believe this bill has ever fully been addressed by the E&T committee. It was passed out of the House in 2021, but the bill had gone directly to the Judiciary Committee. It is now, much as it was in 2022, it is jointly assigned to the Environment and Transportation Committee and the Judiciary Committee. So anything that this committee would do to amend the bill would still have to go through Judiciary for its review.
Does this have to go to judiciary again? Oh, okay.
They are secondary on the bill. It would still need to go to Judiciary for its review, or for that committee's review.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Delegate Healy. Yeah, as indicated, I probably should have brought that up at the very beginning. This is a bill that is jointly assigned to two committees. Anything else you want to add, Matt, before I go to the stakeholders?
Just that I understand after speaking with the sponsor that there is potentially an amendment where she's working with the stakeholders. I believe one was even referenced in the testimony at the bill hearing. That might come up in discussion now as you head to the stakeholders for their input.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I have one question for Matt before we go to the stakeholders, if that's all right.
I'm sorry, Delegate Allen. I didn't see your hand. I apologize.
No problem.
Go ahead,
No
Delegate.
problem.
Go ahead.
And I was just curious, Matt, if you knew I'm sorry, I'm just taking a quick step back here. The line about the federal funds, do we know why that line was included initially? Is that something from Judiciary that they might have needed or wanted for any other purpose?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I was just curious.
So there had in previous years, there has been a lot of discussion about source of income.
Mm-hmm.
And source of income, sometimes there was a knee-jerk reaction to accepting federal funds and that kind of thing. Those were in previous years. So that may have been the reasoning for some of that language, Delegate Allen.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
But Delegate Allen, to your point, I plan to do the amendment since it's been requested. I will reach out to counsel and judiciary who had managed the bill at that time. And if there was a reason for leaving it in on the form, then I would at least have that, additional information to share.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Any additional questions or discussions from the members of the subcommittee before I go to the stakeholders? Seeing none, I'm not going to open up the floor to the stakeholders. And if anyone has anything they want to discuss or add, please raise your digital hand and I'll call upon you if you don't mind. And I don't see any digital hands being, Kathy Howard. Unmute yourself. Kathy Howard. Kathy?
Yep, sorry about that. I'm unfortunately not working on a computer. I'm doing this from my phone. So I'm not terribly nimble with this at the moment, but thank you very much for your recognition. There were some amendments that MMHA had on Delegate Hill's bill, which we did have a meeting with Public Justice and I believe the Consumer Protection Division. And there are some additional tweaking to those amendments that we're doing together. And so we are trying to do something to make sure that we've got all of our bases covered. Our main two concerns were this. While this is drawn to 8401, there's a concern on our part that it be clear that the sealing part of the bill or the shielding part of the bill does not apply, where in other parts of the statute there's a prohibition that if you have more than three, I believe it's three judgments in 1 year, then the tenant is not allowed to redeem the tenancy. And what we want to make sure that provision in 8401 is not abrogated by the shielding law. And I'm going to have to look at 8502 to see whether or not that is a problem in that particular statute. The other thing we have, and there was not a whole lot of concern about that between the folks that we talked to. The second one was about whether or not, when there is a rent escrow case going on, where there's a defensive rent escrow, whether or not at the end of that case, where there's a failure to pay rent and a rent escrow case tracking each other together, that at the end, and if you hear my dog squeaking in the background, sorry about that, that makes it clear that the judgment is only sealed at the end of the case, and that and with the court's permission, shall we say. So that was the gist of what we were concerned about.
So you're talking about the escrow. You're talking about two different types of judgments here. Is that correct, Kathy?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about whether or not in the rent escrow case, as you know, a rent escrow case can be started either affirmatively by the tenant, and that's not what we're talking about here.
Okay.
And it just runs through the court as a plain rent escrow case. But it also can come up and start by a tenant who has a failure to pay rent case, comes into court and says, I didn't pay my rent because we have problems in the unit that need to be addressed. And when that happens, at least in my experience in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, the judge will open up both a rent escrow case, and the failure to pay rent case will continue, and they will track each other until there is a resolution of what the problem is in the apartment that the tenant felt that they should not be paying for. Okay. All right. Okay. And that's pretty, and we're still working on those. And we certainly can report back. And I think we do need to take a look at 8502 to make sure that we're in the right place.
Okay. All right. Matt, you have just been made co-host. Okay, so Matt, you are now co-host, and you can share your screen. Hang on a second, Mary, and I'll get to you after Mr. Washington, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'll keep my comments brief. For the record, my name is Ryan Washington with AOBA. I'd just like to say me too to Kathy's comments. We're still working with the bill sponsor on this bill. There's still a lot of work. Our members still find this legislation problematic, but I believe with some of the requested language, I think it will improve upon some of our concerns. And I'll stick around for any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Washington. Delegate Lehman, you're up, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm trying to understand this position of the landlords to try to treat rent escrow differently when it comes to sealing. I don't understand the nexus that Ms. Howard was trying to explain. If you could do a plain English language version for the non-attorneys and not mix apples and oranges here, because I feel like that's what you're doing. I feel like that's often the case with these landlord groups, and it's frustrating, to be honest. But and the other question I want to ask is, if this is Delegate Hillsville, Terry Hill, is that right?
Yes.
So she's not represented here. I hope that there is some effort, or we have some way of discerning how Delegate Hill feels about these amendments. That's kind of a disadvantage of, when a bill comes before a subcommittee and that person's not on the subcommittee. But I'd like a plain English language response to my concerns about, muddying the waters around rent escrow cases and sealing. I'm having trouble with that.
Okay.
Now,
Well,
hang on a second, Ms. Howard. Now,
Oh,
in
sure.
your question, Delegate Lehman, so you're specifically asking about rent escrow and that you're not concerned about the failure to pay rent side of that. Is that correct, Mr. Delegate Lehman?
No, I am not understanding where Ms. Howard was talking about sort of this nexus, in court of rent escrow and then the issue of sealing and
Okay, I got
the
you.
concerns are around that. And they
Right.
spent an awful lot of time talking about that, and you let them all chime in. So I would like a clarification.
Not a problem, not a problem. Ms. Howard, you have the floor, please.
oh, thank you. Let me make sure. There you go. Okay, thank you, Delegate, for asking that question. This bill is not designed to seal or affect the rent, shield or affect rent escrow, whatever happens in the rent escrow process. But where the nexus comes in is the way that a tenant gets to court to talk about and have redress for problems. Sorry about that. I'll get out of here with my dog here. The redress for problems that are in the rental unit, and that can happen two ways. One is they actually just bring a single plain vanilla affirmative rent escrow case, and that tracks through the system and goes wherever it goes. But the other way that they get to do that is they can go into rent court when they fail to pay their rent, and to tell the judge as a defense to the failure to pay rent action that they've got problems in their rental unit. And at that point, the judge will do two things. One, he or she will open up a rent escrow case, and it will have its own case number. At least that's how they do it in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. And then he will do what's called consolidation of the failure to pay rent case with that new rent escrow case. And the two are essentially going together while the repairs are made or whatever is going to happen to make the unit better. And then what the judge does at the end of that case is decide whether or not A, that all the repairs got made, and B, whether or not there should be any rent paid or some rent paid, based on how egregious the problem was by the tenant in the failure to pay rent case. Does that help you?
So what you're trying to say, Ms. Howard, is that if
Well,
there's
so it does some, but I want you to then address the sealing or shielding issue around that, because I think as part of your statement, you said something about that decision coming then at the end. But I didn't know what you meant by that.
Oh, the timing of when the judge, when there would be a question about whether or not the failure to pay rent case should be sealed would happen at the end of the case when the judge is being told what the repairs were, how they were done, and how long they took, and how big a problem it was, and then how much rent the tenant has put into escrow, and a decision is made about whether or not the tenant owes anything to the landlord, or whether the tenant owes a little bit to the landlord, or maybe all of it to the landlord, because perhaps, it could have, there could be a number of different things, but all of that's in the judge's hands. And that happens at the end of the rent escrow case that was begun by the failure to pay rent case as a defense.
Okay, so just last question, Mr. Chair, to clarify, is rent escrow the only situation that you were singling out for, challenging that as a defense in failure to pay rent, that where it would be treated differently than other defenses? Or because that's what it sounds like. And is that
I think in the end that's really the crux of the thing. Rent escrow was designed by this legislature to be the vehicle to redress for tenants when a landlord does not do what he's supposed to do regarding repairs. And what they decided to do to make it fair is give the tenant the option, the option of either bringing an affirmative rent escrow case, which is really not involved in what we're talking about, or using it as a defense if they decided to withhold their rent and go to court to tell the court about it. And that's how the legislature, sort of makes it two different avenues that the tenant can use to get his redress.
okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Lehman. Any additional questions from stakeholders, public justice? Unmute yourself. There you go. Delegate Lehman, drop your hand, please. Public justice, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Albert Turner. I'm a staff attorney with the Public Justice Center. Just wanted to chime in to say that we are still having ongoing discussions with all the parties involved, including Ms. Howard. We are structuring out language. We did want to talk about a little bit the issues that we're having. I think the main crux of the issue is the rent escrow portion of the situation. On our end, we do understand that rent escrow is a defense to failure to pay a rent case, and that even though it functions in a different way than a defense such as lack of licensing, or actually I actually paid this, I don't actually owe this amount, it's still a defense. And so in regards to that, we are looking to see how we can incorporate and protect tenants from being able to use a rent escrow as a defense while also not being able to shed the proper idea that they can also have that sealed as well. And so the conversations are still ongoing. I think that we're moving in a good direction, and we've also shared language, but I think the rent escrow portion is still up in the air. We still want to make sure that tenants have the opportunity to raise a rent escrow as a defense while also being able to take advantage of the ceiling bill.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Turner. I don't think the intent. I don't think any language in the bill has any intent about removing anything relevant to rent escrow. But I appreciate the fact that the two of you are having discussions, and would appreciate the fact that you would bring in perhaps myself or the sponsor in the bill to future discussions, because I want to get all of this taken care of prior to next week. I'd like to have a vote on this particular bill next week, and I do not want to have anything lingering out here, if you could. All right?
Absolutely, absolutely, Chair. We have been discussing that with the delegate as well. So
Right.
we'll keep posted. Absolutely.
Delegate Healy?
Yes, okay. There's also some testimony in opposition to this bill from the judiciary itself. And I didn't know if there was anybody on the call that could address that.
Matt, oops, I'm sorry. And mute yourself, Matt. If you, thank you, Matt. Matt is going to address that issue right now, Delegate Hill. Thank you, Matt. Go ahead.
Sure. So yes, as noted, there was some opposition testimony by the judiciary. There's quite a number of issues. First being that it just highlighting the additional need for administrative support associated with the bill, especially because this is still largely a paper process with the records for these bills or for these actions. Additionally, there was a lack of clarity as to whether the bill would apply retroactively, and if it did apply retroactively, that further increases the administrative efforts that would be required to comply. And there was a reference of the escrow issue, so that is noted. Sorry, I'm just quickly reviewing my notes related to this.
All right. Well,
one of the big ones, which actually I've noted, and it's something the subcommittee would probably have to grapple with, and may prevent the bill from moving, in terms of next week, is there's a lack of clarity about the circumstances under which the court itself should grant a motion for compelling need or in the interests of justice when a tenant has not redeemed the outstanding rent. I do think that those are kind of either more specific language as to that is needed, or the subcommittee really needs to consider whether or not the court should have that level of discretion. And that may be something that the Judiciary Committee in itself, I'm sure, would tackle or address, and something we could get, I could work with their counsel to touch on. That was probably the big one that I also noted in my review. And then there was some general concern over the impact on right of redemption, as well as if the case were to be appealed, the judiciary's claim is that the district court loses its jurisdiction and subsequently cannot seal the records other than the records, its own records, what it possesses for the cases under its discretion. So there are a number of issues that come out in the judiciary's opposition testimony.
Perhaps what we need to do is to get the members of the judiciary to be on the call next week after we discuss with them, Matt, after we discuss with them some of the concerns that have been raised today. Mm-hmm. Let's get them on here next week so we can figure out what the challenges are and see how or if we're going to be moving forward on this. I do not want to stand on the floor of the House with a microphone in my hand and have all these questions popping up then. That's not going to be very good for yours truly, if you know what I mean. Just to clarify with that. Say again? Sorry.
Just to clarify, would that be members of the Judiciary Committee from the General Assembly, or would the subcommittee like a potential member representing the judiciary to be here for the discussion?
We had several members. Didn't we have several members here?
There were, and again, it being a joint bill, any amendments or any recommendations that this committee, that ENT makes, will then go over to judiciary for its review, at which time the Judiciary Committee will be able to offer its own amendments. If judiciary offers its own amendments, those would then come back to ENT for its review of the judiciary amendments. So
yeah, I'm sorry, Matt. What I was thinking is that get those representatives from the judiciary that were here in the committee when the bill was heard, and have the discussion with those three members so that they can understand what some of our concerns are prior to us voting on that and then sending it over to judiciary. Because I want to have their thought pattern and discussion prior to us making a vote and then sending it over there.
Right.
Them having another set of discussions amendment and sending back over here and ping ponging this thing back and forth.
Right. Yes, I'll make a note of that. To next time the bill is discussed, to have some representatives of the Judiciary Committee.
Delegate Ricky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think it could be helpful to have a representative from the judiciary, not just the committee, here with us. I believe they provided written testimony, but my memory could be bad, but I don't think they were there the day that we heard the bill. I just think it could maybe help us avoid potential concerns on the floor for you, Mr. Chair.
I agree 100%. Yeah, we don't want to have any floor problems. Any additional discussions either from the members of the Housing Real Property Committee or from the stakeholders? All right, fantastic. Thank you for your participation. We'll now go to HB 79, which is Delegate Stewart's bill. Matt, you want to give us a highlight on that bill, please?
Yes. Okay. So HB 79 is the Housing and Community Development Whole Home Repair Act of 2023. This is, there is no reintroduction. This is the first time the bill has been heard by the General Assembly. As a general overview, the bill establishes the Whole Homes Repair Program and related fund within the Department of Housing and Community Development. Purpose of the program is to provide funding to local governments or nonprofit agencies to ensure owner occupied and rental units are free of habitability concerns, improve coordination across various home repair programs, which is a defined term within the bill, and increase retention in workforce development programs. Again, the bill also creates a special fund, which is meant to service the efforts of the program. I'm happy to answer more specific questions or address individual portions of the bill. This particular bill had several sponsor amendments, which I sent out earlier. I will share my screen and work from, just need a second to find it. Okay, can everybody see what should be HB 79-613?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is my version that simply combines all the sponsors amendments.
And if I could, just for a moment, Matt, for clarification, as I recall, there were several suggested amendments by the sponsor, and what you're showing us now is the markup of the sponsor amendments. Is that correct, Matt?
Yes, all I did was take the sponsors amendments and roll them all into one document, so we could have a reprint with everything to work from.
I just want to make sure everyone was clear. That's all.
I do believe there are additional amendments from the sponsor that may be coming, just to let everybody know. But again, because the purpose of this meeting is just to discuss the bill, it's not an issue, and I will highlight those at the next time this is reviewed. So the first amendment that you'd see is on page 3 of the reprint. Apologize for the scrolling. I know that can be disorienting. But it's right here in the middle of the bill, or the middle of the page, and it adds specific home repairs programs. Just generally, home repairs programs mean federal and state programs other than this whole home repairs program that provide financial assistance for repairs or improvements to residential property. So this is just adding, as part of the illustrative list that's already in the bill, other specific programs that would qualify. Are there any questions about this amendment that I can address? And again, that's on page 3 of the reprint, starting at after line 10.
I don't see any hands up. Scroll down just a little bit lower, Matt, so we can see the bottom of that page, if you don't mind. There you go.
Sure. So then there's a second part of this amendment. There's, non-substantive changes like the renumbering here.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if we scroll to what is page 5 of the amendment. So one of the uses of the funds to the local administrative agencies, as part of the program, the program makes grants to local administrative agencies for various purposes. One of those purposes is subject to certain conditions, providing financial assistance to residential property owners for a variety of purposes. Those are before you right now. This amendment would also add the one that added to the home repairs program list would add reducing greenhouse gas emissions as another purpose for which funds could be used. Now, separately, I had the opportunity to speak with the sponsor, and he noted that the and here that you see should be an or. The funds really should be used for any of these purposes or a collection of these purposes, and might be too limiting, requiring funds to have to be used for each one of the 4 purposes here on any single project. So that's an additional change I would make.
So hold on right there, Matt, and let me go to Delegate Healy with this particular amendment. Delegate Healy, you have the floor.
I'm sorry. My question on this amendment is about, was there ever any discussion about using this also for historic preservation on some of these old homes and that in older neighborhoods that might have restrictions on what they could do?
Specifically adding these programs, I'm not sure. If I recall correctly, and I can definitely do more research on this, but at Roman numeral 8 that was added, the Climate Catalytic Capital Program established under Title 10, Sub 8, Part 5 of the Economic Development article, I believe specifically revolves around certain adaptive reuse projects that could be for historic sites. It's I'd have to verify. I know that there's a catalytic tax credit that is used for that purpose, and I just have to verify that that's what's being referred to here.
If you could really take a look at that, Matt, because in Delegate Healy's district, there are a lot of historic homes that sometimes when renovations are done, the renovation permits are stalled because of the historic labeling of the homes. And a lot of times they can't get any restoration permits for those homes in Delegate Healy's district.
And I believe Ruth Ann Norton from Green and Healthy Homes Initiative should be on the call, and may have additional information about that specific issue. I don't know if it makes sense to perhaps bring her up now or go through all of the amendments first.
Let's while we're on this specific amendment, let's just pause and so we get all the questions answered as we go through it. Ruth Ann, are you there? I don't see her. Okay. Let me just scroll down and make sure that she is in fact not here. Hang on a second here. And no, she is not here. Okay, so Matt, I see Mr. Wiggins has his hand raised, so perhaps he can weigh in on that. Mr. Wiggins?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out my client, employed Prince George's, not MMHA today, is interested in the provision 2 here on line 5, and I didn't know when you would like me to speak about that. If you wanted me to do it now or after we go through the amendments.
Well, hang on a second. Let me see if Delegate Boyce has a question relevant to his previous questions, and then we'll go to you, Mr. Wiggins. Delegate Boyce?
I don't have a question relative to Mr. Wiggins' question. I was going to ask, I remember during the hearing, and I can't find my notes, that there was discussions about small landlords.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not, what does that mean? And, if repairs are needed, who should we, or I don't know, shouldn't we open this up to? I think I argued that if you own 15 units, I would argue that you're a small landlord. A small landlord is you got, 2 or 3, 15, you've been doing this for a while. And so for me, I would be a little leery. If you have 15 properties and all of a sudden you need, you want repairs, on one hand, it's a stabilizer, right, for the person who's there. On the other hand, it's like, at what point are we are providing funds for a landlord who potentially may not have been appropriately maintaining his properties, his or her properties. And so I don't know if that was open for discussion. I think the other question I had, I can't find it, was whether or not in this case, whether it's the homeowner or the housing provider, if homeowner's insurance was required.
So to take the first question, and I understand that there might be more discussion to this, but I just wanted to clarify, Delegate Boyce, small landlord is defined in the bill, and it's not, to be clear, the 15 rental unit provision is in there, but it's not more than 5 residential properties and not more than 15 rental units. So
Hold on, I'm going back. Hold on, Matt.
That's I can scroll up to it now.
No, I have it here.
Okay.
I got double screen action going here. Okay.
So it's not 15 individual properties.
Let me scroll up to it so we can all see it. Scroll up to
Okay,
it.
yeah, absolutely.
I see. I understood. Yes.
Yeah.
So in other words, I could have 2 residential properties and I could have 1 rental unit or facility that has 15 units in it or 10 units.
No, you'd have to meet the 2 conditions. So something that would not qualify, for example.
I see. It's not or, it's both.
Yeah, if you had 4 quadplexes, you would not qualify because you have less than 5 properties, but you have 16 units.
Right.
I think would be an example I would argue would not qualify in this.
But you could have 5 residential properties and no rental units and qualify.
No, it's the number of.
Oh, it's and.
Yeah.
I
For example, if an individual were to have, say, own 5 duplexes, that should be still a small landlord, because in total you have 10 units and you have 5 total properties. That's at least the way I would read this particular.
I guess I read it a little differently, Matt.
Okay.
Now that I see the and, it sounds like to me, I could have 5 properties and have a rental like unit that had 15. I don't know, I guess rental unit is messing me up. Like are we talking about a single like apartment, or a rental unit is the actual unit that contains the properties?
As used here, and perhaps it's a question of, should this be clarified in any way? I interpreted this when I read it, and this, of course, may not be the way it was intended by the sponsor, but I interpret this when I read it as the unit is the actual. If you had a quadplex, you have 1 building with 4 rental units in it. If you have a duplex, you have 1 building with 2 rental units.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I had interpreted it. And so it's the combined effect of both.
Okay.
Well, let's try to flush this out. And Delegate Boyce will continue to have discussions about it to make sure that it's clear. If you have questions, and others probably have questions as well, okay?
Okay, and then the insurance piece is all I had questions about.
I think the insurance piece is, I think it's silent on insurance. Matt, what do you think? Is it? I have from
I would just note that Hunter Pickles with the Department of Housing and Community Development has his hand raised. He may have a quicker answer than I do, or it might be on a totally different issue, but it might make sense to call on Hunter.
Mr. Pickles, are you going to be discussing the topic that we're on right now?
Yes, I just wanted to
Sure.
chime in on the units versus properties, and Mr. Meikler was correct. We would consider units to be an individual, say, apartment unit number, but a property would be the whole project, the whole building.
And then from what I recall from the testimony that was provided at the hearing, there might be individual insurance requirements for some of these home repairs programs. And then the goal overall would be to ready, in many cases, use the whole homes program to ready many of these properties that might otherwise not qualify because there are habitability issues at the property generally, to utilize funds from those other home repair programs. So Hunter, is that accurate in terms of the insurance piece?
In terms of insurance, I'm not sure. I will say with the variety of funds that go into this kind of thing. So we operate a whole home program currently that takes a lot of those line items that you see listed in there, a lot of the programs that are in there, and basically takes a common application. And then on the backside, we figure out which fund sources are appropriate to try to address the scope of work from the application. And so we will, for example, one program might not be able to do mold. And if there's mold present, then you can't do the energy efficiency, which would then allow for energy efficiency programs to be leveraged. So we combine them so that, if one program then allows access to another. I'm not sure about insurance, though. I suppose I could see a scenario where insurability plays into something like that. That's not related to what we do.
If I could interpret, Delegate Boyce, what you're suggesting, based upon some questions that you've asked on other issues and other bills, are you attempting to suggest, Delegate Boyce, that homeowners insurance be a requirement?
I mean, I hate to put it that way, but yes, and I vaguely remember this coming up. Because the issue is, if the house is paid for, or the property is paid for, there's no requirement for insurance. But in this case, let's say I have a property that is paid off, but I have some needs for repair. One or two things have happened. I've either lost insurance because I could not manage the repairs, and therefore, if I use this program and get the repairs done, would it then be able to put me at a repair standard to insurance to then get insurance to protect to protect the home. But if God forbid, your home is paid for, you get these changes, you get these upgrades, and then the house burns down tomorrow, you have nothing to repair. It's one of my unfortunate advocacy issues about homeowners insurance. I'm not trying to cash strap folks, but it's a reality, and I've seen it, and it's ugly, and it is displacing, and folks historically lose homes because they're not insured, or they've lost the insurance due to ill repair or lack of standard. So,
and I understand completely what you're talking about. If we're providing funds, and we want to make sure that the investment is in fact insured. It kind of makes sense. I understand where you're going with that, Delegate Boyce.
Okay.
And perhaps we should take a look at it.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Pickles, before I go back to Matt?
Not on this piece.
Okay,
there was one thing earlier, the sponsors amendment that removed our neighborhood revitalization programs, which I think was probably in response to some of our testimony. I would also recommend removing the community development block grant from that list too. It's not one of the line items that we use for our whole home program, and typically has home improvements and that kind of thing. They're an eligible use, but they're not highest and best use, and we don't typically use it for that very often.
So your suggestion, Mr. Pickles, is deleting lines 8 through 10. Is that correct?
That's correct.
make a note of that if you could, Matthew, and let's have further discussions on that. And what you're suggesting, Mr. Pickles, is that your reasoning for deleting the community development block grant is because it's not applicable to this particular program. Is that correct?
That's right. And the complications with CDBG is given to a number of jurisdictions directly. They administer their own funds for those programs for a variety of uses. And then we administer some number of those funds for kind of the balance of the state. So we can't put CDBG money into jurisdictions that have received their own. But the kinds of projects that we typically use CDBG for, it would be, like a community center or water, sewer, things like that. So we just don't think that it would be appropriate for inclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Pickles. And Matt, if you could continue on to the amendments where you left off, I'd appreciate it.
Just to bring it up, I believe Mr. Wiggins had a question or a point he was hoping to make about one section of the bill.
I'm so sorry. You're right. You're so right.
Yeah.
I skipped over Mr. Wiggins. Mr. Wiggins, that was not on purpose. Contributed to the head and not the heart. Mr. Wiggins, you're up.
Mr. Chair, I'll be very brief. Just wanted to point out my client, Employed Prince George's, their principal workforce development entity in Prince George's County. Very interested in provision 2 here. Would just like to expand it a little bit to include some workforce development programs that connect people with careers in Maryland's housing industry. I'm working with the sponsor on some language. If the bill does move forward, just wanted to put a marker there for future conversations.
Okay. This is line, I'm making a note here. 10 through 12, and this is page number 6, correct, Matthew?
I believe it's page 5.
It's bill page 5, but on the reprint it might be, it's page 6 of the PDF.
Okay. All right. And Mr. Wiggins, you are going to be having conversations with the sponsors, correct?
Yes, sir. They've already begun.
All right. I do appreciate that. Matthew, you want to continue on, please?
Yes, sir. Okay, so the next amendment that we get to is on the very next page, bill page 6, page 7 of the PDF, and this is where the final 2 sponsor amendments that I've received are included. The first amendment makes changes around the loan. It was a forgiveness provision. Now it's more loan amortization provision. It's in the bill for small landlords. So the first is, instead of the loan being forgiven, although it ultimately may be forgiven, the loan will be amortized annually if certain conditions are met. The first piece, and my understanding is some of these are tied to suggestions by Maryland Multi-Housing Administration. Actually, some of these are tied to Maryland Multi-Housing Administration suggestions. So it may be, after discussing the amendments, appropriate to bring them up to highlight maybe some of the goals here. The first would be that the small landlord offered to extend the lease of the tenant occupying the unit when the funds.
I'm supposed to be in a hearing. Did you know?
Were first accepted.
Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
Yes. Or by automatic renewal. I'll be honest, when I first read that, I wasn't entirely clear on the purpose there. I think after reading it again, that the goal is to say that the lease could be automatically renewed for 3 years, or an offer was made. I mean, I think maybe it's appropriate to have MMHA highlight or discuss the goal of that, if that was in fact to address an MMHA issue with the bill. The next one would be providing allowing for additional time for an appeal to be processed on this provision. Under this provision, where in the preceding 15 years, the small landlord has corrected serious violations at the property. The standard in the bill as written was 6 months. They'd have to correct the violation. They have 6 months to correct it to stay compliant. This would allow additional time for an appeals process if one's if additional time was granted in the appeals process. Sorry. And then the bill just highlights that if 15 years after the date the loan was initiated, the conditions of this whole subparagraph were met, then the loan in total would be forgiven. I did also discuss with the sponsor this use of base rent. I was a little unclear there of what that meant. And in that discussion, he clarified that it was supposed to be not to exceed 3% of the rent in the preceding year. So maybe there's room for some clarity there. But yes, I would take any questions.
And in terms of clarity, Matt, are you suggesting that we have additional discussions with the sponsor? Is that what you're suggesting?
So in my discussion with the sponsor, I think the language should be something to the effect of, for 15 years or more, the annual increase in monthly rent for the unit has not exceeded 3% of the rent paid in the previous year. The goal is, year by year, rent wouldn't increase by more than 3%. Any increase has not been more than 3%.
Mm-hmm.
So the best way of saying that, and I'd have to sit and think about how that might be clarified further.
Okay.
It was just unclear what by base rent it was meant that it was the rent as of the time when the loan was initiated, because that is a standard that's used elsewhere in this provision. I do see Ruth Ann Norton has joined and is raising her hand. Maybe she can clarify a bit more. If that's acceptable to the subcommittee.
So, Matt, thank you. And I'm sorry, Delegate Holmes, for being late. I was in another meeting. My hand raise was on looking at this language. I know that we submitted an amendment through Delegate Stewart to move that 15-year loan down to 5. I don't see that. So that was my question, but I'm happy to answer any other question.
So and to that point, and when I mentioned that there are other amendments from the sponsor, that was my my understanding is there is a much more involved amendment. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to address all the changes until I see the actual language.
I agree.
Oh, I see.
I agree 100%, Matthew. If you don't have it, you cannot address it. So if you, I don't want.
Absolutely.
I don't want to start waving our hands and all over the place. So if we don't have it, we're not going to discuss it.
But again, because the bill.
No, I'm agreeing with you, Delegate.
Right.
Delegate, I'm agreeing with you. If he doesn't have it, we can't discuss it. My understanding was that it was submitted.
Okay.
And I believe it's under
that was me agreeing with you.
Okay.
Saying hello.
Matt, go ahead.
No, I mean my review of this bit of the amendment is done.
Okay.
If there were any questions or any further
Delegate Lehman.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly, to follow up on Ms. Norton's point, the 5 years she's talking about, that would that be in place of everywhere that it says 15 years, or I didn't follow what she said, because I was going to ask about the relevance of 15 years throughout this section.
Ms. Norton.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the reason that we were recommending going down to 5, one was an incentive to get those really, first of all, for very low income rental property owners that we often deal with. 15 is going to be something that will keep them often out of the market of wanting to do this. So we want those that have high health needs or emergencies or whatever to be able to be addressed. But more importantly, Delegate, in most of the federal grants that come through to DHCD for home repair around health-based housing, home repair, which is this is getting at, those grants are
5-year forgivable loans or fully just a grant. And so the standard across the country is a 5-year forgivable loan, not a 15.
Okay, that makes.
That's the basis of us trying to align up with where most of the money's actually going to come from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for the clarification.
All right,
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And I'm as Matt indicated, we've got other amendments coming in, and once we get those, we'll put that into the discussions as we go forward. Matt, have you completed your amendments in the bill, Matt?
There's just one more at the bottom of the page,
Sure,
and it's right here after line 33. Generally, this amendment would require that at least 2/3 of the funding needs to be used for the purpose of providing grants for residential property owners whose household income does not exceed 50% of the area median income for the purposes identified in C1 of the bill. Just to help, for discussion purposes, I'll go back up to C1. And it's these purposes here for addressing habitability concerns, improving energy or water efficiency, reducing greenhouse gases, if that amendment were to get in, and making units accessible for individuals with disabilities. So it would reserve 2/3 at least of the funds for these grants to these lower income homeowners. And then the remaining third, at most could be used for these other workforce development purposes, loans to the small landlords for the same purposes, to offset administrative costs. So the bulk of the money then, as I understand it, would be used for the grants to homeowners.
Got it. I do appreciate it. And I think that's you've completed the entire set of amendments. Is that correct?
I've completed all the sponsors' amendments, except for the ones that are in process, as we'll call it.
Right. Okay. I'm going to open up the floor now briefly, Hope, to any of the stakeholders before we close this bill out. Ms. Norton.
Thank you, sir. I saw there was a question about whether I would answer some questions on insurance. I'm happy to do that. I don't know what was raised, but I'm happy to answer the question. And the other is that I just wanted to raise my hand and say the whole concept behind the whole house approach is aligning and braiding and maximizing the use of home repair funds. And I understand, and I haven't read it, and I will, Mr. Pickles has put in on behalf of DHCD an amendment that would withdraw sort of the foundational money from this whole home approach. And this is the very basis of making sure that we are properly aligning home repair with weatherization, lead hazard control, asthma reduction, trip and fall. So I would just say that we're going to be, from our organization's advocacy standpoint, taking a hard look at that and question the thoughtfulness of whether or not that hurts the overall approach. I just wanted to raise that, having really advised on these in a number of states. I'm happy to answer questions, sir, on the insurance if I know what those questions are.
Ms. Boyce, Delegate Boyce, you want to entertain the question? With,
I can, I know for the sake of time, I can take it offline and talk to Ruth and I can send her a message. Yep.
I do
Yes,
appreciate
sir.
it. Thank you
Yes,
very
sir.
much, Delegate Boyce and Ms. Norton. Any
Thank you, sir.
additional discussions on this particular bill, HB 79? Hearing none, I do appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen. I know this is quite a detailed piece of legislation, and we'll be discussing it again next week. Let us now go to the next piece of legislation, which is something that is proposed by the fantastic, magnanimous Delegate Holmes, HB 93. Matt, you want to go through and tell us a little bit about HB 93, sir?
Yes, sir. So it's House Bill 93, residential ground leases redemption and extinguishment requirement. I'm gonna just share my screen so we can generally have that bill available for discussion if there are any questions about specific language.
And if I could, Matt, just for historical purposes, I do hope that everyone in the subcommittee understands by whom and when these groundworks were established. King who? But anyway, go ahead, Mr. Matt.
King Charles.
So the bill would repeal statutory provisions that prohibit a landlord, or sorry, at least hold tenant from providing specified documentation and payment to the State Department of Assessments and Taxation earlier than 90 days after an application for redemption or extinguishment has been posted on STAT's website and makes other technical changes. Just for example, what those technical changes might be, there's use of State Department of Assessment and Taxation throughout the section. That's now a defined term, so they just use department instead. It's a truly technical change. I would note that there isn't any sort of impact on notice in terms of how long there would be notice provided to public and potentially a leaseholder. This really just makes it so that an individual can pay to SSTAT or pay into SSTAT the necessary funds for redeeming that ground lease.
Thank you, Matt. And
before the 90 days have passed.
Right. And as we heard in the testimony, sometimes when the payment is made, it causes a lot of concerns with the department. And this is clearly a technical piece of legislation. And we'll discuss this again next week.
Yeah.
Any discussions from anyone on this particular piece?
Nope.
Great. We'll now go on to the final bill of the evening, HB 102, Delegate Stein's bill in reference to pet protections. And Matt, if you could give us some discussion on HB 102, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Should just bring the bill up again. Okay, so for HB 102, this is a reintroduction of a bill that passed out of this committee, I believe unanimously, but passed the House of Delegates with favorable with amendment in this form as you see it. Sorry, there's one tiny change in terms of certain provisions taking effect as of October 1. They would now take effect as of November 1. That is the most substantive change that was put into the bill. Passed out of the House 130-1. Generally, what the bill does is establishes certain standards for notice regarding policies about removing pets from rented dwellings in the event there is a eviction, and that's it's just providing notice as well as certain duties for the sheriff as the eviction is taking place.
And the only part of the bill that is different from the part that passed out of here, 130-1, is in fact the effective date. Is that correct, Matt?
Not the effective date. Certain provisions in the bill take effect on, or well, not take effect. You're required to do certain things on the bill as of a certain date. That date was the effective date of the bill. Mm-hmm. It's been offset by effectively 31 days.
Okay.
There were several requested amendments. I can go through those. I've not received anything from the sponsor. I'm happy to discuss. Primarily looking at the amendments, at least 3 organizations have requested expanding upon what a pet is. Currently the bill covers dogs and cats. There were several, like as I said, several different requests to expand upon what that means and include different types of animals. There was one request from the Apartment and Office Building Association, Metropolitan Washington, to that would effectively strike a certain notice provision that landlords are required to make under, or certain notice requirement landlords are required to make under the bill. It would be on page 3, lines 18 through 23. So effectively this section here that would require provision of the fact sheet created by the Department of Agriculture to a tenant if the landlord knows that the tenant has a pet. And then there was, I believe there was one other amendment.
And we don't have any of these in writing yet. Is that correct, Matt?
No, they're not in writing. None have been offered by any members of the General Assembly. I'm just discussing amendments that came in through testimony.
Through testimony, I got you. Yes, sir.
Yes, and one of the amendments that was included was from Maryland Legal Aid. In addition to expanding what would qualify as a pet, would require the landlord to follow the same process as a sheriff, constable, or other official in situations where a lease ends or is not renewed. And that would be providing certain information and contacting certain groups if a pet was found.
Okay. All right, well, we'll take a look at those, Matt. And I'm curious, Matt, I'm gonna make a guess. If we pass this 130 to 1, I'm gonna guess that that one person was a member of E&T committee. Is that correct, Matthew Uriroka?
I couldn't say.
Oh, okay, I'll look it up, but I can imagine who that guy was. So ladies and gentlemen, that does take care of our 4 bills for this evening. I appreciate your patience, everyone, and we will come back and visit these perhaps next week. We did hear, as a practical matter, ladies and gentlemen, bills that are heard on Tuesday are typically bills that come before this subcommittee. So when you come to the E&T committee hearings on Tuesdays, those are usually bills that are relevant to Housing and Real Property Subcommittee, usually. And we will be having our subcommittee meetings on Wednesdays, every Wednesday. The time frames of those meetings will vary, obviously, because there's several other things going on. Is there any anything anyone want to have for the good of the order before we adjourn? Matt?
Yes, I do actually have a quick point. So I had originally sent out an email about another subcommittee meeting on Friday for just a foreclosure training process with the Department of Labor. That has now been canceled. There will still be that briefing. However, it will be a full committee briefing on Tuesday the 14th before the bill hearings. So instead of 1 o'clock bill hearings, you go 1 o'clock briefing as we've been doing certain days, and then flow into the bill hearings for the day.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me, Matt. Initially, I had requested that the foreclosure training be done specifically for our subcommittee because we are the ones that deal with foreclosures, et cetera. The chair of the committee felt that the foreclosure training discussion was so important that he should expand it not just for us, but for the entire committee, which is why it's going to be heard next Tuesday. Thanks for reminding me, Matt. I appreciate that. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you. Oh, I'm Delegate Boyce.
I just want to say this was my first Real Property Subcommittee meeting. So I'm excited. I mean, new for other folks as well, but I've been on environment and transportation for a number of years. So I feel like I'm out of my element, but this I'm enjoying the topic.
Fantastic. Well, as long as you understand ground rules were established by King Charles I on June 20th, 1634, you're okay. Delegate Long.
My first subcommittee too.
Delegate Narecki.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Another newbie. So I was just wondering if offline we could share our contact information. I have most of my colleagues' contact, but not all. I think it'd just be helpful because sometimes I know we have those discussions that are helpful offline on certain things.
Well, since we have most of these subcommittee members here, does anyone object to me sharing email addresses amongst us? Any objections? No objections? Okay, so I will then share cell phone amongst all of our the subcommittee members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wiggins.
Go ahead.
No, I just want the newbies to understand that Grayson and I are vice chairs of the committee.
And with that, for members of the subcommittee.
Grayson's scared to put his face in there. He's like, I don't want anything to do with that comment.
For the members of the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee, I am the chair. Any vice chair opportunities mean that they are buying us lunch, dinner, and breakfast. That's what that means. You guys have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.